Hi, good morning, everyone. We're a couple minutes away from the start of the call still, about 2 minutes away. Looks like, Bob, you're already on board.
I am.
All right, good to see you. Nice to meet you also.
Yeah, right. Nice to virtual world, right?
This is how you meet people now,
That's it. Yeah.
virtually. So typically, we get started, right at the top of the hour at 11 o'clock. So we'll, of course, do that once again. Wait for a couple more people to hop on board. Just for those who are on the call, just want to say thank you for joining us. We've been trying to do as many of these calls as possible, getting our members connected to different lawmakers, policymakers, community leaders. It's our pleasure to do that for all of you as a service to you. And we're going to keep doing it until people tell us to stop. So thanks again for hopping on the call, as many of you do almost every time. I really appreciate it. And of course, we're grateful to our partners as well. We have multiple partners who have taken specific interest in making sure that these calls are enabled. And so Wells Fargo, BBSI, Office Depot, and Eide Bailly, just want to thank them for their support for underwriting the work of the Chamber, everything that we're trying to do to keep our members afloat and successful through this time and equipped with what they need in order to thrive. So let's see, still got about a minute more. Just a quick reminder to those on the call, if you have any questions for Bob during the call, please go ahead and use the chat function in order to do that. So again, the standard procedure for these calls is we will take questions from the audience at the end for about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how many questions there are. So please feel free to ask whatever question you think comes to mind, anything that's relevant. Go ahead and pop it into chat and we will try and address it at the end of the call. So with that, I think I'll just go ahead and introduce Bob before we get started, as people are still hopping on. Bob Potts is the Deputy Director for GOED, which is the Governor's Office of Economic Development here in the state of Nevada. He served as its Research Director and has about 30 years of experience in data research and analysis. And because of this expertise, he is considered the leading expert in the business, workforce, and economic environments of our state. And so it's my pleasure to welcome you, Bob, to our call and to speak to our members today. As we get started, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and also about the office of GOED and what the mission of GOED is.
So I actually have tenure here at GOED. So GOED was formed out of the 2011 legislative session. It used to be the Commission on Economic Development in the Lieutenant Governor's office. We were in the middle of the Great Recession at that time. Governor Sandoval at that time pulled economic development, made it a cabinet level position, hired Steve Hill to be the executive director. I think I was the second person hired. It was February 12th, 2012. So about 8.5 years into this gig right now. We were in the throes of a pretty bad recession then, and here we find ourselves kind of in it again, but very different, right? Very different recessions. If you look back over the past decade, what's happened in the state and regions within the state was really phenomenal until COVID came along. And the Great Recession was largely driven, financial markets, housing crisis, our pro-cyclical economy wasn't at all helpful during that time. Our pro-cyclical economy is magnitudes of level more problematic right now during COVID. But COVID and the recession that we're seeing right now is by economic forces. The fallout and what we're going to have to deal with will be economic forces in nature. But this was an administrative closure in response to a health pandemic, right? And very, swift and immediate action that obviously had some pretty positive outcomes on the health side of things. But really, shut our economies down and really pulled us back on that front. That said, I think there's a lot of optimistic opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity out there to get things done where we couldn't get them done before, and to kind of go a new direction and kind of retool the state going forward. And I can talk about some of those things if you'd like.
Oh, definitely. We will certainly, get to those subjects 100%. I would say everyone has heard the term pivot ad nauseum now throughout this entire pandemic. And I think one of the most striking comments that the governor made, it was fairly early on in the economic shutdown, was, whether it was an actual change or just a philosophical change, changing the name of GOED to the Governor's Office of Economic Recovery as opposed to the Governor's Office of Economic Development. Now, again, the name may not stick, but can you tell us a little bit about what that fundamental change has looked like for you?
Michael Brown is now our executive director. Governor Sisolak came in, in January 2019. We went for almost a year with interim executive director, and then Michael came on board. 3-4 months into this is when COVID hit. But Michael and I were talking the other day. GOED or GOER, whatever. There is no way this agency can recover an economy. Okay, but what this agency can do is help work with and support and work with partners and partnerships, and kind of be the visionary for how do we kind of work our way through this, understanding the fundamentals of economics, how economic regions work, how regional economics works, having a depth of understanding of our state and where we're at. A little bit of background. So 2018, and I know many of the folks that are on this call were part of the whole assessment. We hired SRI. SRI stands for Stanford Research Institute. It's a spinoff of that right now. Working with partnerships, we did a whole assessment of the state's economy in 2018. Right, a lot of things have changed since that assessment. We continue to work with SRI. We were going to build out a 5-year strategic plan for economic development in the state. Then when COVID hit, and I've been kind of put on point as the person that's working with SRI on the state plan, but we pivoted into a recovery and resiliency plan, a 12 to 24 month recovery and resiliency plan. A lot of work's gone into that. Of course, you have to be able to kind of think at these early stages in a triage perspective where, all the uncertainty and everything that's going on with that. A virus that's new, that's not well understood, it's getting better understood, working with partners, trying to maintain the work that we're doing in the directions that we're going to do based on the health situation until there's a vaccine or herd immunity, whatever you want to call it, and things can stabilize out. But that's where we are right now, putting together this 12 to 24 month strategic plan for recovery and resilience. The first 6 months, so going through the end of this calendar year, is going to be really, on this triage side of things, working very closely because it ties in with a lot of the federal funding streams that are out there right now. A lot of those CARES dollars, they expire at the end of this calendar year. So working with, especially supporting and helping small businesses on that side, whether it's rental assistance programs, whether it's SBA loans. Early on, we were the first state that got SBA approval for the SBA loans, working with them and the Paycheck Protection Program. A lot of that. One of the things that I've facilitated regularly since the middle of March is RDA calls. We contract with the regional development authorities and to keep them all on the same page on all of these different verticals that are, that are out there, whether, it's the CDBG grants, whether it's what EDA has out there in their NOFO grant, what is going on with USDA and what's available there. And then, of course, there's the allocations that came to the state. There was like $1.2 billion. Some went to City of Las Vegas, some went to Clark County, and then working on the $800 million or so that's the state allocations, and how do you work that out with the counties and such. So that's all part of this 6-month plan. And what we're going to do, and I can talk in a little bit more detail what that looks like, what we're going, but then going on into the into the future. So getting prepped up, ready for the full 2021 legislative session, how we're going to help provide direction in both the medium term and then building out so that once it stabilizes, then we can actually start building a 5-year strategic plan for economic development. So, but we got to get all the shifting sand kind of settled in first.
Right, absolutely. And this may be a premature question, given the fact that most of us are working day to day, probably best case scenario, month to month in advance. I know that GOED has prioritized, several sectors of opportunity, 7 sectors of opportunity, and they range from mining to travel and tourism to IT to logistics, manufacturing, natural resources, healthcare, specific sectors of industry that Nevada would be primed to welcome into the fold. Just even if it's just preliminarily, what would you say might be shifting in terms of those priorities? Are those still the industries that you think we're going to prioritize for economic development and growth, or do you think that we're going to be shifting to some other industries in the future?
So yeah, good question. So Nevada has shown in the last decade where we have a comparative advantage, right? And so as we start moving forward in this, we're going to actually narrow the scope. So we had 7 sectors that we were focused on. We're going to narrow that scope down to focus on manufacturing, particularly advanced manufacturing, logistics. So that'll all be part of it. We're going to focus on technology because it cuts across all the sectors. So you get advanced in there, you get renewables, you get clean energy, you get, all the things that technology touches on. So that's a really broad one. And then of course, healthcare, right? So we have shown, our state, as economists, we use location quotients all the time. We're actually only 2/3 of where we should be if we were at the national average for healthcare. And I think early on when COVID hit and our healthcare capacity and everything else, it showed that we need to build that out. As a general rule, and I know a lot of folks talk about this, what you want to do from an economic development perspective is focus on these primary jobs. So if you think about regional economies and how they work, the way that you grow a regional economy or a state's economy is having more money rolling into the region than that's leaking out. So you want to get those kind of industries where most of your consumers for either your goods or your services, and that's another conversation, where those customers live outside the region. Manufacturing, in my mind, is a hallmark in that space. Mining has been, but you know what? Mining takes care of itself, right? We're there to support it, but not really target it as much. But on the goods side, it's not near as the procyclical challenges that we face right now, right? When people foxhole, they don't demand the kind of services that leisure and hospitality has. So we really want to try, if this is where this is going, let's figure out how do we retool? How do we retool thinking about workforce development and really making the right thing easy and the wrong thing difficult as far as having available staffing for those industries that are very primary in nature, right? On the infrastructure side of things, again, make the right thing easy for those kind of industries to be successful, whether you're talking about broadband infrastructure, whether you're talking rail infrastructure, highway infrastructure, air transportation, or industrial parks, right? Or those that are site ready and ready to build out. So 4 of them. So look at those 4: manufacturing, logistics, healthcare, and technology.
Gotcha. Usually when times are tough, it is important to get focused, no matter what your business model is, no matter what sector you're in, no matter what industry you're in. So it sounds like that strategy is going to serve us well. I'm glad that you brought up the workforce because I have a couple questions, and I realize some of these questions may be more appropriate for someone from Dieter or maybe more appropriate for the labor commissioner, but we'll do our best. So when it comes to the workforce, I mean, some of the budget cuts we're looking at directly impact workforce development. We're looking at K-12 cuts. We're looking at workforce training and rehabilitation cuts. What are some, if you're looking into the future, and knowing the kinds of painful budget cuts that we're facing right now, what do you think are some of the long-term impacts that we're going to see in terms of Nevada's workforce, knowing that the pipeline may be somewhat disrupted?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing, what you have to do is you have to go back and revisit what are the priorities, right? And I've done a lot of work, a lot of people on this call that I see your faces or your names. We've done a lot of work in this space identifying those really in-demand occupations and those skills that really matter to employers, and those that really tie back into these target industry sectors that I talked about a little bit, right? I think that if you're, and I get it, I mean, you know, we're all in a, and it's part of the issue, right? 38% of the state's general fund is tied back to leisure and hospitality. That's a big challenge, you know, when it's, you know, when it gets hit as hard as it has. So if you have less to work with, you need to, especially in the post-secondary side, really focus those dollars in those areas that matter not only for attraction. I mean, and I've said this on a number of presentations, is it an available and qualified workforce that attracts great companies, or do great companies grow a qualified workforce? And the answer to that question, both those questions, is yes, right? And it's kind of a chicken and egg kind of thing. So I think that when we start thinking on the technology side, we need to make sure that we have folks that are really built into the STEM training on the post-secondary side. We need to make sure on, you know, on the secondary side that there's visions that's built into the students there about what the opportunities are in advanced manufacturing and technology, in healthcare, in some of those different spaces. So I think that it's not, you know, we all have tight times in our budgets. So when you have tight times in your budget, you have to kind of come back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and say, if this is your need to get to where you want to go in your goal, then let's pour coal on that part.
Right, absolutely. And on the unemployment side, what's interesting right now, luckily, in very much a good, which we would consider good news, you know, unemployment reached its peak at 30% back in April. In June, it sits at about 15%, so it's certainly going in the right direction. How long do you think it will take to get our workforce back to pre-COVID strength when it comes to lower unemployment, more folks on the job? We know a lot of folks who are still on unemployment are tied up in the hospitality industry. Do you think that some of those jobs are simply gone? And if so, what are some of the solutions for those who are waiting to go back to work but perhaps don't have those jobs to go back to?
Well, I'll start off. So another set of calls I've been facilitating ever since the 3rd of March, actually, weekly calls with economists in the state. So in January, the governor put together an economic advisory group, put me on point. So I have economists, I've got economists in taxation. I've got economists that come from Dieter's Research and Analysis Division. I've got the state demographers on there. I've got economists from Health and Human Services. I've got private sector economists. So we all get together on a weekly basis to talk about all the data that's out there. And what I told these folks early on, I said, because this is new and it's, you know, we have no historical precedence for this kind of event, especially when it comes to the data side of things. And economists, it's stated it's both an art and a science, right? So we all want to default back to the science side, to the math side, to the modeling side, to all the rest of this thing, you know, where you can talk about numbers, and everybody loves numbers because, you know, it's kind of hard and fast. It's easy to get your head wrapped around. But the art side, understanding how economies work, how they work in your functional area, whether it's the labor market, whether it's tourism, you know, whether it's mining, whether it's regional economics, you know, whatever it might be. To really focus on that and take the information as it comes out, be able to distill it and come up with a thought process where we can coalesce it together into a consensus forecast. Right now, the consensus forecast that we're looking at as the most likely on the unemployment rate in March of 2021 as compared to February of this year is a drop of about 185,000 workers, which puts us at about 14.5% unemployment rate in March. So You just mentioned, that's right, 15% are the June numbers that came out for the state. In our conversations and knowing the data and working with it as long as I have, those numbers will all be benchmarked. And what I mean by that is the unemployment numbers are based on a sample survey of households, right? And so, and what it tends to do is the higher the unemployment rate, the less pronounced what actually gets published in the initial releases, and then they get bumped up. So my sense is that 15% is more like actually 18.5 to 20%. And I don't know if you've seen, but about, it's a half an hour ago now, they just released the sub-state numbers for June, and those sub-state numbers. So Nevada's 15% on this first release before their benchmark, 18% in Clark County, 8.6 in Reno, in Washoe County. So, which we can talk about that a little bit different. I mean, I think at many levels, Las Vegas is going to have to do in the next 15 to 20 months what Reno did in the last 15 to 20 years.
Wow.
About its mix, right? I mean, that's, and that may be a little bit harsh, but at some level, I think there needs to be bold moves, because getting back to your other question, how many dislocated workers are we thinking? So if we're at 14.8% or so, I think that's what we're looking at as the most likely scenario in March of 2021 as the unemployment rate. That's roughly 180, 200,000 workers, right? So in the Great Recession, we lost 181,000 workers, right? And I think that we're going to be down about that many in March as well. If you look at the continuous claims, right, the unemployment insurance claims, and there's a lot of moving parts in that right now as they're trying to work through all the adjudication of all these different claims and things like that. But it's roughly about 400,000, right? That really goes against what those current unemployment numbers are saying at about 240,000. Somewhere in the middle lies the truth. So that gets me back to that 18 to 20% probably is what it's more really like once they benchmark these numbers back. So yes, it's pretty clear it's hit, accommodation and food services. It's hitting, the whole leisure and hospitality side. Those are the ones that are getting hit the hardest. But again, it goes back to it was driven by administrative closure in response to a health pandemic. And it's as simple as density of people, right? Customer to business, colleague to colleague, those kind of things. So until we work through that, and I got to say, the gaming industry has done an amazing job of trying to figure out how to keep people safe, but it's going to be a shift. So what does that mean for us as we try to think about the recovery and resiliency side of things? And it gets complicated, it gets very big, especially when you get in the weeds, when you think about workforce development, infrastructure, funding issues, all of those kind of things. But I think there's amazing opportunities for folks to get these dislocated workers to actually get themselves in a career path that they're interested in, that lights their fire, that has a future-proof job. How's that? So, hope that's
absolutely. And I want to circle back to this because I know we touched on it briefly and talked about the focused approach that GOED is going to be taking, and what particular sectors you're going to be pursuing in the coming years. But what can you share a little bit more about that strategic plan, moving past the triage point of the 20 to 24 months that we're facing in the COVID era? What can you say is maybe the step beyond that?
Yeah, so kind of my idea, or not my idea. So this is work that we're working on right now with SRI. So these are the ideas. They're all to be fully vetted out and thinking about actual strategic steps, operational steps going forward. So an advanced manufacturing hub, right? We've seen what's gone out at the Innovation Park. We've seen those kind of things. But and I've pushed this for a long time. In Southern Nevada, they need an advanced manufacturing hub, right? Or an industrial park that complements what they have going on in North Las Vegas and Apex. It needs to be on the south side of so think south of the Strip, south of the down headed towards California. We sit next to the 7th largest, or thereabouts, it moves a little bit, 7th largest economy in the world. We need to take advantage of everything that goes on over there. And if the pandemic is challenging us and the amazing resilience and the ability of Nevadans and Nevada businesses to reinvent themselves, we're nowhere in the same challenges that a lot of the same businesses have in California. They are looking for a place to go, right? And I think that that creates amazing opportunities for us, especially if we're strategic about thinking about these sectors and what they belong to. But I think it's really a huge benefit to existing businesses as well in this state to think about how they complement, can be part of the supply chain, and can build out in different areas where we know the future is kind of going, the technology side of things and things like that. So that's one of the ideas. So we need to think about renewables and the EV supply chain, right? We've got lithium, we've got gigafactory, we've got copper, we've got all these different things. I think Nevada could be a hallmark for the EV supply chain. And we know that has a very promising future to it. If we think about technology and total connectedness, right? And all these digital public services, especially when we think about, and this is a phenomenon that we're really starting to see that I wouldn't have expected early on, you know, the teleworker side of things, not to mention distance learning and telehealth and some of those other things. But a lot of companies in these dense urban areas have realized that they can be as productive with their workers from home as they can from the office. So why not do that someplace where they don't have to deal with traffic congestion, where they can have quality of life factors that they're looking for? I think that creates an interesting opportunity for us to help build up that base. The health and wellness side, we know that we have a demography across the world, across our country, in this state, where we have an aging population, right? So we need to address that. That's a foregone conclusion. But especially when pandemics like this hit, what is our healthcare capacity? And if we're already only 2/3 of what the national average is, we need to be well above 1, a multiplier of 1 on that one. I guess the last thing, and I would kind of reiterate this, is this remote worker playground, these teleworkers kind of things. So that's in the immediate term. Some of the ideas and capabilities to realize some of those ideas, we are really working on putting together. There's already statute for an infrastructure bank, building out an infrastructure bank and a sovereign wealth fund. We're talking about that. Network of innovation and venture funds. I know, you know, what Edon does up in Reno and stuff, and what Doug Irwin and his team are doing. I mean, they set the tone of how to get this done. So I think working with them, what's going on at the Innovation Center, and working with Karsten Heiss in our office, I think that we need to be forward thinking on that front too. And the homegrown side of things, and the opportunities for folks that are dislocated to be able to take ideas that have always percolated in the back of their mind, but they've never really operationalized those. So think about the work that Innovation Collective is doing. We've actually seed-funded Innovation Collective to start the base work in the city of North Las Vegas for some of their for some of their folks. Need to reform local finance. One of the things that we found out with the SBA loans, as well as the PPP program, was some of the challenges in the rural parts of our state being underbanked. So, you know, working on that and addressing that. Then there's things that are that are kind of outside the scope of economic development specific, that we want to make sure we need to revisit the property tax structure issue. So that kind of fits in that space too. I talked a little bit about the importance of post-secondary, but for where we're at, and if you think about where Nevada is in comparison with North Carolina, or, you know, Austin or the Bay Area or whatever, we have an amazing kind of middle skill STEM sweet spot. How do we support the community college system, as well as private providers in that middle skill space, you know, between high school and 4-year degrees? Not taken away from the 4 years. I don't want to, incredibly important, but I think for us, there's a real sweet spot that has not gotten the attention and the funding that it needs. So I'll just leave that at that. And of course, increasing our renewable portfolio. Another comparative advantage that Nevada has ties in with that EV supply chain. And you know, I'll just say this, that our relationship working with the NV Energy folks is second to none. So keep doing that one. So leave it at that.
Right. I think since we're running short on time, I feel like we could probably pick your brain for a good hour or two more than that, but we won't do that to you. Not today anyway. Just a quick reminder to everyone on the call, if you have any further questions for Bob, now is the time to ask them, as we're running short on time. So please go ahead and hop into the chat function if you have any questions. And as a final closing question, at least for this portion of the call, though it is dangerous to deal in generalities, and I certainly don't want to oversimplify any of these issues. If you were to say that there is one single thing that could help drive economic recovery in Nevada and one single thing that would hinder it, what would those be?
Well, with COVID, I mean, obviously a vaccine would make all the difference in the world, right? That would stabilize. I mean, when I do my Economist calls, we start every one of those calls with a report out by Kyra Morgan. Generally, she's a state's biostatistician on the current situation, the health situation, you know, and that kind of predicates what's going to happen with these administrative closures, which is going to drive what happens with the economy, right? So, God, I'd love to have a vaccine and just get this thing taken care of. I mean,
yeah.
Not for the economy. I mention that because that's the world I live in and we live in. But just, I mean, when I see the suffering that goes on into that sucks. So. And your other question?
On the converse side of that, what single thing may hinder economic recovery? And it could be two sides of the same coin, but perhaps.
Well, yeah, no, and I would say, in my mind, it's when people start pointing fingers at other people and saying, you need to do your part. And this thing is too big. I mean, it's going to take all hands on deck to make this thing happen. There's going to have to be cohesive effort with a vision of where we want to go. And that vision can vary from the state level, which is pretty high level kind of stuff, to each one of the regions and thinking about where you want to go. I mean, we're trying to outline, based on evidence in the past decade, the sectors, for instance, right? And building vision around that. But I think everybody needs to realize that this has been bad, and all we can do is least amount of damage, you know, mitigate damage, right? And I think that's where it's going to take all hands on deck for us to pull on top. But as I mentioned before, Nevada has an amazing ability to reinvent itself. I've seen the tourism industry in Southern Nevada do that in spades, but I think we can do it across the state in all our different spaces to get that done.
Right. Thank you for that. So we're starting to get some questions coming in, which is great. And they're quite detailed, so I'm likely just going to read them verbatim. So the first one that was sent in by an audience member: a strategic plan has no value if you cannot execute it, i.e., put the money behind education that will advance these sectors. That sweet spot could be filled with Nevada Technology Academy that offers 2-year certificate programs in information technology, cybersecurity, blockchain, etc. But they are constantly denied any funding, grants, etc. to bring their programs statewide. Do you have any insight as to why that could be?
Well, I think it all comes down to there's never enough resources to get done all the things we want to get done, right? And the decision makers on budgets and dollars and how they're spent often create frameworks that you can't paint outside the lines on, and so that's always been an ongoing challenge. My sense is, and I think this is right. I think that, you know, 6 to 7 months down the road, once we get past all the dollars that the federal government is spraying out there to help support and bridge us through this crisis, and we find out where we're really at, you know, how many folks are really unemployed, what the continuous unemployment situation looks like, that some of those conversations are going to change, and working in these different areas, like was mentioned here, become more palatable. And quite frankly, that's my hope.
Gotcha. Next question. This is also a good one. Do you have any insight as to whether or not some of the budget cuts that were just pushed through the special session, whether or not they're going to impact some of those strategic goals that GOED has in mind for the future?
Well, yeah, I mean, they absolutely are. I mean, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take what we have and focus those more on those high priority areas. The last thing I want to see happen, and GOED is no different than any other state agency right now. I mean, you never want to lay people off, but if you continue to cut on the program side of things, pretty soon you have folks that don't have anything left to do, right? And so we don't want to go down that road. I think what this creates for us is for us to think outside the box of, I mean, we always default back to government, whether it's state or local, funding these initiatives. That's why thinking about a sovereign wealth fund, thinking about an infrastructure bank, thinking about different financial tools, private partners that want to do things. And believe me, there's some pretty great conversations that are going on right now where you can get them done around, where the private sector can get them done around, you know, traditional sources of funding streams. I mean, take for instance, and it's just been great working with Jim Murin and his task force, you know, and it was specific to PPE. All those dollars were raised private and their connections actually made that thing happen, right? What's going on with the Business Information Network. I mean, those are surprising and wonderful avenues. We need to continue to build on those and operationalize those in a way that can be nimble and works around and outside of the structure of, well, what's going to come out of the special session and things like that.
Right, and that's actually a great segue to what we'll go ahead and make our final question, which is, you know, the responsibility of the private sector right now to step into the gap, and of course, by extension, to, you know, our chamber and our chamber members to fill in that gap as well. What words of wisdom and what almost how would you commission us to help fill in the gap that we need to fill in order to make sure that we can ensure recovery?
Well, so first of all, I mean, this is what I've noticed. It doesn't matter what the issue is. Most of the time it can be mitigated or it can be directed with good communication. So what you're doing here, I think, is critically important, right? Getting everybody on the same page and talking and seeing the other person's point of view, the other perspective, having an appreciation for that and coming up with, hey, we're going to do this because this is where it kind of works for everybody and this is what makes most sense. And if you hadn't said that, I wouldn't have thought about that, right? So when it comes to workforce development, really getting on the same page of what really matters, talking to employers and saying, you know, what kind of staff are you really looking for? What matters to you? So employer engagement into the workforce development ecosystem. I mean, there's the folks that are going to hire these people. Why in the world would education ever train people that didn't have a market to go to? So I think, you know, that's where it becomes really important that there's feedback from industry, from businesses that talks about this is what matters. Is it energy prices? Is it real estate costs? Is it workforce? You know, what is it that we can do that makes the world go round and grows our economies?
That's a fantastic place to leave it. And I want to thank everyone on the call today for your conscientious questions. I wish that we could have gotten to more of them. We're already about 7 minutes over time. I thank you for your patience. And Bob, thank you for giving us a little bit of extra time today to address our members' questions and to give us such thoughtful and conscientious responses to our questions as well. It's going to be a long road, but we're grateful to have people like you at the helm, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and your insight with us today.
And it's great working with everybody on this call. Let me know if there's anything we can do, okay?
All right, thank you so much. And everyone, you have a great day.
Okay, bye-bye.